Welcome back, everybody. This week, the week of Christmas, we're going to be talking about Christmas, and we're going to be talking about dualism too and how they are related. They're not really related, but they're related enough, and I want to talk about Christmas because I love Christmas, and I want to talk about dualism because it's an important concept. If we do not completely extract the splinter in our mind that is dualism, we're never going to be able to achieve psychological health. And I guess it does relate to Christmas somewhat because how our culture has handled Christmas throughout the last couple thousand years is a good indication of what we need to do with our own premises of dualism, or our own implicit beliefs that are of a dualistic nature. First of all, though, what even is dualism? It is the belief that the human, metaphysically, by our nature, we are made of two distinct substances. We have a higher self and a lower self. We have a spiritual part and a material part. We have a good part and a bad part. And ultimately, these two parts of ourselves are fundamentally at odds. We cannot reconcile them. They're going to be fundamentally contradictory, meaning that our own drives, our own ways of acting in the world are going to be fundamentally in a contradiction with each other. We're always going to be sacrificing our lower part for our higher part. Maybe we'll talk about altruism a little. We talked about it a couple weeks ago. And I think the first instance, probably not the first instance of dualism in Western civilization, but at least the codification of dualism comes from Timaeus, the Platonic dialogue, describing the creation of the universe, and there's all this chaos, and how did order come from chaos? Did it come from the chaos itself, figuring out how different parts of the chaos are actually related when you just need to combine those parts into concepts, and that's how we get order? No. The order in the chaos came from the demiurge. I totally just messed that up. See, I read this all the time, but I never say it out loud. The demiurge. It put the order in on from the top. To create order out of chaos, we needed something else coming in from the top. And we see this in psychology all the time. I mean, just the idea of thought control, right? I mean, I talk about this all the time. If you have a negative thought or any, that's a good one. We have negative thoughts and we have positive thoughts. Negative thoughts are bad, positive thoughts are good. If you have a negative thought, control it. Replace it with a new thought. You know, my favorite example, the subway train comes into the station and your thought is, I want to jump in front of that train. Oh, just replace it with a positive thought. No, we look at the thought and see where it's coming from. And of course, we have a structure to do that. I think you already know how to ultimately overcome psychological dualism is you create a structure with your emotions, obviously. So control thoughts, and another kind of controlling thoughts we talked about gratitude. Not that it's wrong to feel grateful. Of course, it's great to feel grateful. It's great to feel grateful, but you don't make yourself feel grateful. Because if you're feeling bad, there may be a lot of information in whatever pain you're feeling that you need to use. Needs come in, you become angry, you repress those needs, you become sad. The only way to feel grateful is to assert those needs, to get those needs met while getting the needs of others met at the same time. Creativity. But this is top-down dualism. Bottom-up dualism would be, let's just call it emotionalism. Great example of emotionalism, or at least a funny example, is California in the 1970s. There's this kind of therapy called scream therapy, primal scream therapy, and you would just go in this room and think about the trauma that your parents caused you, and you would scream to release the tension of these essentially chaotic emotions. We cannot make sense of these emotions. There is a part of me I cannot make sense of. Dualism. I mean, this was implicit, I mean, maybe probably more explicit in Freudian psychoanalysis too, is he believed that the emotions, they were these primal instinctive parts of ourselves that could not be managed. We just release them like releasing a pressure valve. Yeah. A lot of weird stuff went on in California in the 1970s. Which, by the way, when you go to California now, especially Marin County, I'm looking at you, bunch of cafe gratitudes. They're really trying to feel grateful because there was a lot of weird stuff. Primal scream, that's at least the PG version of the weird stuff. Primal scream therapy. Any sort of emotionalism, and I would just define emotionalism as, look at me, look at how special I am because I have this emotion. You're not really making sense of the emotion. You're not talking about the emotion in a constructive way. It's emotional indulgence. That's another way of saying it. Which contradicts, which goes against how you're supposed to talk about that's just as a quick aside, men are often told, oh, you're repressed by society because you're not allowed to be emotional like women are. That's ridiculous. Of course men are allowed to be emotional. I mean, every freaking action movie, action hero movie, superhero movie, even Schwarzenegger movies from the 1980s, but even Stallone, I mean, obviously Stallone movies, First Blood, every male action hero has been really emotional. But they express the emotion in a certain way, right? You don't just express the emotion and say, hi, look at how special I am. What do? Maybe I'll do another video on this, but you express the emotion while, number one, taking responsibility for it. This emotion, however comfortable it may make you feel, it's your responsibility now. Primal scream, just screaming about the parents or the trauma that your parents caused you, is the antithesis of taking responsibility for your emotion. And you talk about the emotion in a way that connects with others. Really, again, the opposite of emotionalism, which is, hey, look at me, I'm so special because I have this emotion. No, you're not special because you have that emotion. Everybody has that emotion. Now, maybe our experiences, the exact formula of experiences that causes that emotion in us, maybe that's special to us, but the emotion's the same. Basically what I'm saying is we need a way to figure out how to work our emotions, how to use our emotions in a productive way. You know how to do that. I'm going to get to that. But I think the story of Christmas is a great story that shows us how we can overcome our own forms of dualism. I mean, Christmas probably goes back, maybe tens of thousands of years, but really Christmas as we understand it today really came to prominence in Rome in the celebration of Saturnalia, which is, of course, a celebration of the winter solstice. And there was a lot of drinking and partying and having fun, causing a ruckus. And it made sense that this would happen because we're celebrating, the returning of the sun, the rising of the sun. Is it an S-U-N or an S-O-N? It doesn't matter, but we're celebrating its return. Time of the year also when people usually had the most food in the beginning of winter. And you didn't want it to go bad, so it made sense. Look, the sun's rising and we have all this food. Let's have a party. Now, the early Christians didn't like Saturnalia. They were opposed to it because it was seen as fun. It was seen as a lower form of human existence, indication of the mind-body dichotomy in Christianity that was really started in ancient Greece. And so there is this conflict between, should we have fun on Christmas or should we be moral? Should we appease our lower selves or should we appease our higher selves? Ultimately seeing these two as a contradiction. But then something happened, something called industrialization, something called capitalism. And now we are able to create wealth, not just exchange wealth from hand to hand, which is how most history occurred up until industrialization, until capitalism. Now we can create wealth and give gifts and receive gifts. This is a completely anomalous happening. in our world economic history. So now we're able to have fun on Christmas while also being moral, while also creating connections with each other. And this is a great indication of what it looks like when you resolve your own inner dualism, is you'll see how your, quote, what you previously thought your higher self actually shines light on your lower self, and you need information in your, what you previously thought as your lower self, to inform, to enervate, not enervate, that means to weaken, to energize your higher self. You know, like the idea of giving and receiving. There's a connection in that. When you give somebody a gift, you're creating a connection with them. And that can well be thought of as a spiritual experience, which we can then use, and let's say you go to church, you can say, oh, well, what I'm doing when I'm partaking in the commercial capitalism, the supposed lower part of myself, I'm actually informing, I'm giving new light to connections that I make at church. And I think that's ultimately what a religious experience is. It's a connection with some idea, with some higher representation of what you think you can be. It's all a connection. And of course, the experiences at church show, hey, maybe what I'm doing when I'm giving my friend a gift, it's not, it's not, they're not contradictory. Or what I do when I make money to give my friend a gift. It's all a rich tapestry. But that's the point of psychological health, is not to see ourselves as ultimately two contradictory halves, but to go, how can my lower half, right? How can my unconscious, gotta do this every week. How can my unconscious inform how I interact in the world in a productive way? And then how can I use the energy from either asserting my anger, that gives you compassion, another word for that, of course, is gratitude, or confronting my anxiety, confidence, how can I use that to then inform how I look at my unconscious? It makes it easier. The more you look at your unconscious, the more likely you are to look at your unconscious, and the more likely you are to use whatever it is in your unconscious, your avoided anxiety, your repressed anger, which is sadness, the more likely you are to use it in a productive way. And that's what happens, that's the story with Christmas. As we ultimately saw that giving gifts and going to church or pursuing whatever we thought was more, quote, moral than capitalism or commercialization, we ultimately saw them as two sides of the same coin. And now on Christmas, we can, partake in whatever spiritual practice we want to partake in and give and receive gifts, and nobody really thinks it's that big a deal. I mean, there's always some argument about this every Christmas. Usually revolves around whatever Starbucks puts on their coffee cups that year. But it's not really that big of a deal, at least not what it was back even 200 years ago. I mean, who's the guy who wrote The Night Before Christmas? He was a minister. Winslow Clark? Something like that? Anyways, he was a minister. He wrote The Night Before Christmas, and when he first published it, he didn't put his name on it because he really wrote it for his kids, and there was no mention of God or Jesus or anything like that. So it was like, oops, I let it slip. A Christian Puritan minister likes to have fun on Christmas. And then it started to unravel from there, and now it's really not that big of a deal. But really what's more important is using the story of Christmas to overcome your own dualism. Whenever you see a contradiction between what you want and what you need, it's not a contradiction in reality. It's ultimately a contradiction in you. It's because of dissonant premises that you hold. Discordant premises, one of those words, right? Contradictory premises that you hold in your unconscious. The only way to really see those is to look in your unconscious. Meditation, journaling, therapy, group therapy, identifying with others as they're talking, saying, oh, their experience is my experience. Emotionally, it's all the same experience. And then your unconscious comes up. You begin to look at it, and the more aware of it you can become, the more likely you are to use it in a productive way, and that's how we overcome psychological dualism. Thank you for watching, guys. Please like and subscribe. Your assignment this week: take this topic and talk about it with one person, with one friend. You don't have any friends? Go knock on your neighbor's door and annoy them with this topic. But even more importantly than that, have a Merry Christmas.